Now, give us the right to pay our way. That's what some asylum seekers in our region want.
At the moment, most of those who are seeking sanctuary here are not allowed to work or to study while they wait for their claims to be decided. Some have to share rooms with other asylum seekers in government-sanctioned accommodation and must live off just under 38 quid a week.
So now, one of our councils has heard calls for this ban on asylum seekers being allowed to work to be overturned, but critics say this would undermine the asylum system.
BBC Newcastle's political reporter Fergus Hewson has been looking into this for us. Fergus, you've spoken to an asylum seeker about this issue.
Yes, I spoke to somebody called MD. He's a Bangladeshi asylum seeker in his late 20s who lives in Newcastle. He's part of an organisation called Migration Asylum Justice Forum. Now, we're not using his real name, as he says he fears reprisals from the trafficking gang which brought him to this country in the first place, and those who forced him into domestic slavery, effectively, before he was freed. Now, he's waiting for his asylum case to be decided, but in the meantime can't work or study, and he even says it's almost impossible to open a bank account. He says he feels like a second-class citizen, totally excluded from the society he lives in.
Asylum seekers shouldn't have been blamed for everything. No, we are trying to contribute for the country, we are trying to integrate in the society. I am doing 3 volunteering jobs. I'm trying to be for the community, and I don't have any opportunity. I'm being barred from every places I go. Even if I go to GP, I have to show my ID. It's like everyone is a immigration officer everywhere.
3 voluntary jobs, and he says that situation would be better if he was allowed to work, to pay his own way.
Well, that's right. He argues that if he was allowed to work, he wouldn't have to depend on cash from the government, and would be able to make a contribution to be able to better integrate as well.
You have people in your own country who is classified as a refugee and asylum seekers. Why don't you use them to in the workplace and get tax from their work? That will help the country. You don't need to bring people from outside of this country. You've got people inside in your country. You could give them education. You can give them right to work. They will make this country better.
How many asylum seekers are there here in the North East, Fergus?
Well, there are around 600 asylum seekers in Newcastle, it's thought, and across the North East that figure's around 3,500, and in the UK as a whole around 40,000. Now, most of these people have what's known as no recourse to public funds, so benefits, effectively, while their claims are decided, and they can't work or study. Now, the exceptions are when people have been waiting for more than a year, and if they meet strict criteria and are on meet criteria that are a list of jobs where there's a particular labour shortage, and that's a very limited amount.
And Newcastle City Council has heard calls for an end to that ban on asylum seekers being allowed to work.
That's right, yes, I'd heard these calls last night. The Labour leader of the City Council, Nick Forbes, wants the council to back what's called the Lift the Ban Coalition, which is a campaign to give asylum seekers the right to work.
I think people should be allowed to earn their own way, and many of the people who come to our city as asylum seekers are highly qualified professionals. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're nurses, they're physiotherapists, they're people who could make a real contribution to our society if only they were allowed to work. And of course, there's a national process for people to have their asylum assessed. But surely it's the right and humane thing to do to allow people to be part of a society while that's being assessed, and that they can contribute to that society rather than having to rely on state handouts.
So, Fergus, any sign the government might change their mind?
Well, obviously asylum and people coming here claiming asylum across the Channel, and in particular at the moment, is a really big issue. The Home Office told us it's listening to arguments around permitting asylum seekers to have the right to work, but it wants to make sure that it safeguards the integrity of both the asylum and immigration systems, which are, of course, different things. It does say it recognises the importance of work for well-being and community integration.
But there are people who think the current system is fair, it's working.
That's right, yes. I spoke to Migration Watch UK. Now, it believes that levels of immigration have been and are, in fact, unsustainable into this country. Ben Greening from Migration Watch told me that the current asylum system is fair.
Asylum seekers can already work in the UK in a number of circumstances, and we think that the current position is reasonable, and the suggestion that it should be liberalised further does not stand up to scrutiny for 2 reasons. Firstly, it would encourage abuse of the asylum system in our view, and would likely lead to the job prospects of young people here in the UK being harmed.
And Mr. Greening also thinks that allowing all asylum seekers to work could encourage people to try and come here illegally.
It could encourage bogus claimants to possibly to spin out the application process even further in order to gain permission to work. And we don't want to see the asylum system used as a means of backdoor economic immigration when it's really there to help those who are in the most need.
Ben Greening from Migration Watch UK, ending that report by our political reporter Fergus Hewison. Thanks, Fergus.
And thank